Stand. I'm going to read two short bits, one from my novel, When Franny Stands Up, which came out last year, and one from my next novel, which is coming out next year. When Franny Stands Up is, my elevator pitch I give is that it's a queer, marvelous Mrs. Maisel where jokes are magic. And in this excerpt, it's Christmas 1944. Franny has snuck into the Empire Room at the Palmer House to see comedian Boopsie Baxter, who has a famous and secret showstopper, which is a kind of magic that female comedians foist on their audience when they tell jokes. Franny is trying to figure out if showstoppers are real, and we'll figure out what the big deal is in this excerpt. The evening had begun with a set by the Palmer House Jazz Band, broadcast for the hotel's Christmas radio show. The comedy that followed would not be broadcast. Only those ladies lucky enough to see it in person would know it even happened. The all-girl band packed up their instruments, chatting animatedly with the stage crew as they tested the spotlight. If it hadn't been for the war and its insatiable appetite for men, including artists and comedians, would Franny be watching male musicians right now? A man comedian? Impossible to imagine. Emily Post complained in her etiquette book that wartime comedy marked the death of good old-fashioned femininity. Alas, American morals are fraying at the seams even as our boys are fighting and dying to preserve them. Franny read the whole book, hoping for some mention of showstoppers, but Emily Post either didn't believe in them or didn't consider them worth mentioning. A cocktail waitress swooped over to Franny in a stylish but surprisingly skimpy getup and set a glass mug with a lemon wheel floating in it on the table. But I didn't order anything. Franny politely tried and failed not to stare at the waitress's jiggly décolletage. On the house, the waitress said in a shockingly high-pitched voice, courtesy of Diane at the door. Diane's suit bunched up around her ears as she relit her cigar. Franny turned back to the drink. What is it? Hot toddy, said the cocktail waitress, holding out her palm. I thought you said tip? Right. Franny dug into her purse and pulled out a nickel. Thanks. Boopsie's on next, the cocktail waitress squeaked. I never miss her for anything. Sorry if I took your seat, Franny said. I prefer to watch her in private anyway, the waitress said, jiggling away before Franny had a chance to ask what she meant. A red-haired beauty, probably the singer from the house band, grabbed the microphone. Ladies, without further ado, it is my pleasure to announce the girl who started it all, the comedian who needs no introduction. The audience clapped harder. Some cheered and whistled. Franny could barely breathe. Please welcome to her Empire Room debut. Franny couldn't believe she had pulled it off. She was really about to see, with her own two eyes, Boopsie Baxter. Chairs scraped the floor and dozens of elegant ladies hopped to their feet to cheer. Franny stood and cheered too, even though her voice sounded funny in her ears. She froze mid-clap as Boopsie shimmied on stage. Her red sequin dress hugged her every curve, winking like fish scales. Black hair laid close to her scalp, shiny and finger-waved. Her neck was drenched in diamonds. She embraced the singer who introduced her, and Franny was surprised at how small Boopsie was, and then waved demurely at the audience. She was more captivating even than her newspaper photos. She probably smelled terrific. All right, Boopsie said in a smoky voice that sounded many years older than she looked. We're all thrilled about the birth of Jesus. Now sit your asses down. The crowd tittered and sat. Franny felt prissier than Mary Kate, blushing in the dark at the word ass. Sit down, hissed a voice right below Franny. It was Diane from the door, looking up at her. Franny was the only one still standing. She plopped down in her chair. And drink up, it'll get cold. Franny took a sip of her drink and coughed. This has alcohol in it, she said. Diane laughed. No kidding. Merry Christmas, kid. Two extremely handsome men in tuxedos wheeled out a glossy baby grand while Boopsie ogled them. That's right, fellas, she said in that husky voice. One of these days, if you're lucky, these fingers will practice on you. She settled in at the piano. Let's warm up with a little holiday music. Get those juices flowing. The audience clapped their approval. Franny attempted a second sip. The drink was warming and lemony and vaguely spiced, and now that she was expecting alcohol, it wasn't too bad. Boopsie tinkled a few notes on the piano and started to sing. And I'm sorry. When you see a pretty fellow with a certain kind of asset, and you want to get a hold of the eggs in his basket, just remember this one trick. The best way to get his stick Smash your boobies, smash them together. Squeeze those titties in any weather. Franny laughed and blushed at the same time. She took a big gulp of her drink for courage. It warmed her fast, spreading low into her belly. So low, in fact, that if she were being honest, it wasn't really her belly at all. Boopsie tinkered on the piano, smiling that sly smile. Thanks so much for coming out on Christmas Eve. Christmas is a special time, a very special time. When else can a respectable woman sneak a strange man into her house, accept gifts, and wiggle around on his lap, asking for more? Oh, yes, Santa, I've been a very bad girl. And that, my friends, is the real Christmas magic. The room exploded in an atom bomb of laughter. Imagine Mary Kate listening to this. Franny pictured Mary Kate shaken to her core, her sweet, heart-shaped face frozen in an expression of horror. Franny laughed until her ears ached. What was there to worry about again? Life was grand and hilarious. She relaxed into the laugh, felt it bubbling up from deep inside her. And then her giggle became a moan, a loud one, the kind of noise that Franny would never consider making. She slapped a hand over her mouth, but the moan continued behind her hand. She grabbed her mug for another gulp, but it was empty. Was this what being drunk felt like? A warmth filled her entire lower region. The physical sensation was irresistibly exciting, and Franny desperately wanted to give into it. But what if people noticed? What if she ruined everyone's nice, relaxing evening by yowling like a tomcat? She forced herself to sit painfully still and kept the feeling inside until it passed. But on and on Boopsie went, her words barely comprehensible over the sound of Franny's own heartbeat. Franny's breath came ragged, and suddenly she was yelping like the Finnegan's Yorkshire Terrier Noodles, and then an explosion rippled upward from her nether regions through her chest and arms and head and down to her tingling toes, and Franny melted into her chair. She had never felt so good, which felt bad. She wanted to leave. Her limbs were empty fire hoses, and she could barely stand. What had she done? Immediately after the heat evaporated, it started to build again. Oh no, Franny said, in a voice that didn't sound like her own. What was this place? They had slipped her a Mickey Finn special, that was for sure. Franny forced herself to stand and ignored the heat building up again. She stumbled, knocking the chair over on her way to leave. What did you put in my drink? She said to Diane, whose cheeks were rosy and eyes unfocused. Let me out! Slow down, sweetheart, Diane said. Remember our deal? I let you in, you be cool. Cool? I'm sweating through my dress, and I am not your sweetheart. Diane looked her up and down, and Franny crossed her arms over her chest to hide... What? I don't believe it. A showstopper virgin, Diane said, grinning. And Boopsie Baxter popped your cherry. If that ain't the limit. Hey, Dolly, she nudged the cocktail waitress. Get a load of this. But Franny would not be gotten a load of. She pushed past Diane and tugged open the French doors, squinting in the dim lights of the lobby. She oozed down the marble stairs, dashed through the gilded doors so the doorman had to jump out of her way, until finally she was standing in the middle of Monroe Street in the blistering cold night, letting the snow cool her cheeks and sucking in the fresh air until it burned her lungs. Franny shrugged her coat on and refused to cry. Whatever happened in the Empire Room was not magic. Magic was supposed to transport you out of yourself, not sink you deeper into it. Magic was supposed to give you courage, not something else to worry about. From now on, no more Boopsie Baxter, no more Empire Room. Forget all about showstoppers. But how could Franny forget that? She would make herself forget. Boopsie who? Mama and Papa would never have to know. Leon would never have to know. It would be so secret that Franny would keep it a secret from herself. Franny hustled down State Street to Adams, keeping her coat open as punishment, which was awfully Catholic of her, something Mary Kate would do. But Mary Kate would never allow herself to be consumed by whatever had consumed Franny. Boy, whatever it was, it sure felt great. Franny wished she had stayed at the Empire Room long enough to ask Diane, what was Boopsie's showstopper exactly? Would it have killed her to ask? Stop thinking about it. Forget about it, remember? Franny hopped up the slick steps to the L platform at Adams and Wabash and gave all her remaining pocket change to some scrawny urchin who couldn't believe his luck. What happened, happened. Forget about it, Papa would say. The future doesn't care about the past, and neither should you. Franny most definitely did not want to think about Papa right now. Thanks. All right, so we went from our magic orgasm story to something entirely different. This is a short excerpt from my forthcoming novel, which is called Remember You Will Die. It's coming out October of next year. You really don't need to know anything right now, except that it is a story told in linked obituaries. So I'm going to read. They're fake. I made them up. They're not real people. Shayna Payne, 1973 to 2085. When Shayna Payne was 5 years old, she got in trouble for drawing God. The kindergarten class at Temple Sholom outside Cleveland was instructed to draw a picture for each of the 7 days of creation. When Shayna got to day 7, she drew a bearded, pot-bellied God reclining on a celestial couch, which was itself floating on a fluffy cloud. She had only a 5-year-old's vocabulary, but there was something touchingly mortal about an omniscient and deathless God needing to take a load off after a long week. She could relate to him in a way that Shabbat services didn't permit. Her teacher loomed. "You can't draw God," she said. "That's idolatry." She smashed a finger into God's belly. "This is no better than the golden calf." She made Shayna start over from day 1. But how do you draw God resting without God? What's so holy about an empty couch? Shayna Payne didn't try to be a rebel, and maybe that's how she ended up one. Mrs. Payne died on Mars this week, the second human to die on a planet other than Earth, and the first to be buried there. She was 112 years old. Before Mars, Shayna made her home in Brown County, Indiana, where neighbors recount stories of her warbling 20th century songstress Pat Benatar while sashaying through the aisle of the IGA in a vintage floor-length mink. Bonnie Stark, proprietor of Bonnie's Cafe, famous for their 10-cent coffee with any purchase, a quaint artifact from the days of coins, remembers Shayna differently. Shtup was the word she used. She said she was shtupping my husband, which I guess means sex in Jewish. Everyone in town knew, but Shayna was the one who told me, which I guess makes her honest. I was so stunned I could hardly speak. She said, "Your husband would rather lie and cheat than talk to you. This is a marriage? Give me a break. Divorce the bastard." So I did, and then he died anyway. When asked what kind of pie Shayna preferred, Bonnie said, "Strawberry rhubarb." Mrs. Payne was part of the pilot resettlement program with Red Care, the historic crew of 36 centenarians who arrived on the Red Planet in August 2078. As part of her contract, she donated her remains to Red Care, the Mars colonization project officially, quote, "via an exciting experimental process that we believe will result in arable land on Mars for many generations to come." Her body will be the first to be rapid decayed and turned into compost. Then the agrarian arm of Red Care will attempt to grow wheat, rice, corn, and soybeans for consumption and export, compensating for the shortages on Earth with the ultimate goal of human resettlement on Mars. Though contractually enthusiastic about her life on Mars in public live streams, Shayna was privately critical of Red Care. "They say we're not here to colonize, not because it's true, but because colonize is a bad word," she wrote in pencil on paper and encrypted using Hebrew letters with phonetic English. "They believe Mars is empty, and you can't colonize empty space, you can only fill it. Also, the food is terrible. I suppose we're here to fix that part with our corpses." None of the other pioneer centenarians could be reached for comment. Payne was born Shayna Epstein, the only child of 2 high school English teachers, Bernard and Susan Morton Epstein. Bernard's family emigrated from Israel. Susan's family was Catholic, her first ancestors stepping onto American soil in the 1650s. Bernard built their house using the bulk of his inheritance from his estranged father's book royalties. That's right, our Shayna Payne was also the granddaughter of famous 20th century novelist Ari Epstein, author of the beatnik Bible, Water, Water. Shayna also described herself as a writer, but unlike her grandfather, never published. This obituarist has not found a single document or private journal other than the handwritten note above, and he has looked everywhere. "She may not have written much, but she loved to talk," said her former neighbors. Indeed, there are plenty of pithy quotes from her in the local papers. The Brown County Democrat included her in its series on local artists in the late 2050s, and when they asked why she never published, she replied, "We love to believe that making art for money is freedom, and making it for any other reason is failure." Isn't that twisted? Shayna leaves behind no descendants. My ex-husband Paul was sure he would outlive me, she said in the interview, but he couldn't even outlive the flu. Correction, November 3rd, 2085. An obituary ran on October 6th for Shayna Payne, the first human to be buried on the planet Mars, self-proclaimed writer who had never actually written anything. A single poem was found by Fox personality Raleigh Durham in his spam folder on October 8th, which we have been able to trace back to Mrs. Payne. Mr. Durham's secretary stopped him from deleting the strange email. We publish it here in its entirety. Untitled, number 77. The shift of light before sunset is so depressing. I know this is a circadian thing. Hormones go soft, lose their boners. In people with dementia, this is the hour they get lost. It's called sundowning. I wish I had known the Mars sunset was blue. It's a daily horror for Earth eyes. Makes you want to wander and get lost and disappear. I forgive myself for being a reflective surface, for hiding. Listen, your truly best work will not be beloved because it's not a mirror. You made me, therefore you owe me, is every prayer in every faith. A doctor tells me I'm healthy as a horse, those words exactly. How long will this saying persist, I ask, on Mars, a horseless place? He says with grave seriousness, a good sense of humor keeps you young. But I don't want to be young. Everyone wants to be young, he snorts, very like a horse. Rosy-fingered dawn, Homer called it, bloated dawn, gangrene dawn, who will be Mars's epic poets? This orange planet with its blue sunsets, my blue planet with its orange ones. Correction, December 1st. In the correction to Mrs. Shayna Payne's obituary on November 3rd, we assumed the only piece of writing the deceased ever wrote had arrived in the email inbox of a media personality. But as of today, 36 poems and essays and short stories have appeared as spam around the world, sent to journalists and world leaders and artists in the days and weeks following Mrs. Payne's death. The Democrat requests that you share this correction with your social networks and check your spam folders. Message any findings to Mike Mattingly at mmat@bcdemo.news.